Hello. Hello. Welcome to Trey. Thanks. Hello. My name is Isaiah. If you don't know me, I have the extreme honor to work at Trey all the time. So thanks for being here. We have a bunch of staff here. So if you're not acquainted with what we do, please ask and we will inform you. Maybe if you don't want to be stuck in a conversation for 30 minutes, don't ask me because I tend to talk too much. But we're so thankful you're here. We obviously believe that God orchestrated it in a way for you to be here tonight on a random Tuesday. I thought it was Wednesday earlier, but it's Tuesday. So welcome. Happy Tuesday. So like I said, we're stoked to have you here. We're stoked to have Justin here. I was just talking to him beforehand about I do opens like this for not opens. I'm not a comedian, but I open for people when they're here. And he asked kind of how that was going to look, and I just said like the really cool thing. I think one of the best things, one of the biggest honors and blessings that it is to do ministry is you get to just like let God do His thing. Like there's not. I mean, ideally we do that with our entire life, but at times it can be a little harder. But with ministry, it's kind of like at all times we're kind of at in God's hands and just letting Him kind of move. And Justin being here is just complete God orchestration, and it's really cool to have him here. He has an awesome story, so we're really stoked to hear it. Really stoked to hear how the Lord's moved in his life. And so, please, I just ask that you give him your attention. Um, don't get on your phone. Sandy's gonna come yell at you if you get on your phone. So just stay off your phone. No, she wouldn't do that. But maybe I would. So, but no, just give him your attention. I'm gonna pray over him quick, and then he's gonna dive into his story and kind of what the Lord's done in his life. So thank you again for being here. So, Father God, we just lift up Justin, Lord. We just thank you for his life, Lord. We thank you for his willingness to say yes to you. Lord, we are so thankful for the obedience that he walks with in his life. And Lord, we just pray that every person in here can be impacted by his story, Lord, on a personal level. Not just that it's a cool testimony, Lord, but that they get wrecked by it, Lord, that they just see your hand in it all. And Lord, that it just shifts our perspective in any way that we needed our perspective shift. So we love you. We thank you. We are honored to call you our Father, and just pray over Justin and his talk tonight, Lord. So we love you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. I forgot I have an intro video, but before that, maybe I can also just say a quick prayer. Thank you all for having me. This means a lot. It means a lot. All right, God, do your thing. Amen. Amen.
We are live! Speaking out of the red corner, he's a lover and a fighter!
Justin Wren is like next level when it comes to like a leader.
And to see someone like Justin, this rare soul, everything he does is channeled towards good. All of it, including kicking people's asses.
Yeah.
I help people overcome and thrive, discover the tools, tactics, and techniques to change their spectrum on what's possible.
And now, it's time! Presenting the one, the only, Justin, the Big
Okay, thank you. What meaningful impact would you make if you only knew you could? We're at Trey, the ripple effect. What difference would you make? What movement could you, with God, create? What legacy will live through your life? And how will you glorify God through that? This is Mama Mariamo. She stands just 4 foot tall, weighs at most 80 pounds. And as I think you can see, it's a little small on this screen, but she's blind. It's called river blindness, which is caused by the contaminated water and black flies infested with parasites that surround it. This is me at the height of my mixed martial arts career. 6'3", 255 pounds. And in the middle of Las Vegas. Meanwhile, Mama Mariamo is living perhaps the simplest of all human existence, deep in the heart of the Congo Basin rainforest. So I think it's safe to say that we are about as different as two human beings could possibly be. Yet the story that I want to share with you tonight is how this little woman changed this big man's life in a profound way. And perhaps when we're done here today, she'll have done the same for you. And so I'm truly honored. I'm really, really grateful to be here with you all to get this invitation. Is there anyone that didn't even know this was happening tonight that ended up coming? Anyone? You're my guy. You're my guy. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I also really have a beard crush, I think in the room. Where's that big gnarly beard? There it is. Yeah, absolutely. No, this is a really special moment for me for this to happen and for all y'all to, I'm from Austin, Texas. We say all y'all. And it just means a lot that y'all are here. And I really feel honored to be able to share my story, testimony, and thank you for being here at Trey and being part of this community. Part of what I'm going to talk about tonight is community. And as I get back into my story, I grew up getting very heavily bullied. This is actually a picture that my mom sent me very recently. I was one of the last kids in America that had a chili bowl haircut. You might be too young for that. And if you can't guess what my favorite movie was, it was actually Beverly Hills Ninja. And because I grew up getting very heavily bullied, I remember there was this one, I hope no one in this room can relate, but I'm probably wrong about that. And there was this one time I got invited to my middle school crush's birthday party. And it was a costume contest. And this was my biggest crush in school, whether it was elementary school, middle school, high school. I see some heads nodding. You might understand that, can relate to it. And the invitation said, costume contest, winner gets a prize. It was going to be a Dr. Pepper gumball machine with Dr. Pepper flavored gumballs. So pretty cool. People were talking about what they were going to go as, and it was going to be Avengers and Marvel characters. And I probably should have gone as Thor, but I didn't. And I wanted to catch her eye. And so I went all out. And I found out that she loved Transformers. Her favorite character was Optimus Prime. So I decided I went to the grocery store right around the Super Bowl time. And they had these, her birthday was around the Super Bowl time, and they had these displays up. So it inspired me. Why don't I go as Dr. Optimus Pepper to her party? It's in the theme of the party, so go all out. My mom helped me. I took a 24-pack, had it on my head, 12 packs on my arm, and we used some duct tape, and I had a chest plate and a shield and a sword. And I went to the party, and when I got there, with the back door opened, and I was hit with flashes of light. And my eyes are adjusting, but I hear the sound of laughter. And I realize I'm the only one dressed up. Nobody else was, just me. And my middle school crush, Jennifer, said, I can't believe you thought you were good enough to come to my party. So that crushed me. And Tyler next to her said, you're worthless. And then my notorious middle school bully, actually from 3rd grade to 8th grade, he said, you should just kill yourself. And so I don't know that I've really shared this part of it much before, but the year before in 7th grade, we all attended a funeral or a memorial of a skater kid named Landon. That was one of my only friends at school. And he took his life. And so if all that group, I think upon reflection, looking back on it now, it stung so much deeper, because if we all experience that loss, that grief, and they're telling me to do the same, then maybe I really should. And that was my first time to run away. I ran away, and I ended up behind a Dairy Queen, and I remember ripping off that costume and throwing it in the trash can. Years later, I'm talking 20 years later at therapy, I'm talking with a psychiatrist and this guy that just really has loved me and helped me in so many different ways. And he goes, have you ever thought maybe that's why when you get sticky hands, like you got to go wash them? Because when I threw away in that dumpster, there was maybe blizzards or chili dogs or the duct tape residue. And I just remember from that moment, I sat down behind the dumpster and I hugged my legs and I kind of rocked and I just wept. I just cried. And I thought in my head, you're not good enough. You're worthless. Maybe you should just kill yourself. So their words became my own self-talk in that moment. At 13 years old, you believe, or you're more apt to believe the things people say about you. And certainly I did. Not too far along after that, about a month or two down the road, my parents made a big sacrifice for me. They removed me from that school, so got me in a better school. But they sent me to this, or we went on this, I don't know, went to a flea market where they sold a bunch of junk. It was like probably stolen car parts and radios, but there was a used VHS tape store. None of y'all know what VHS tapes are, do you? Some of you do. Yeah, good. But I would say that seeing these guys, I bought UFC 1. Actually, it was missing one. I think it was UFC 2 through 11. I spent all my allowance on that. Because when I picked up the VHS tapes, I thought, these guys don't get bullied. No way. And if I could maybe transform into one of them, then I won't be bullied. I could stand up for people that are, or maybe I would be invited to the party, like for real. And it changed my life. I saw some cauliflower ears, was on Trevor, right? And I got into wrestling first. And my parents made that big sacrifice for me. And these were my two high school coaches. It's kind of small up there, but that's Kenny Monday and Kendall Cross. They were both Olympic gold medalists. And they believed in me before I believed in myself. And I can't tell you how much that did for me. And I wasn't planning this at all, but it just popped in my mind. But even thinking about Tracy and this place and Trey and what it stands for, a place of belonging, purpose, and hope. I believe Tracy and the family and the people that run this, like they see something in y'all. They believe in you, even if there's times that you can't really believe in yourself. That's why communities like this are so amazing and so transformative. That was what I found in wrestling, was if I could do something with wrestling. If I could become someone, maybe I'll be invited to those parties. So those guys are the ones that formed me and coached me and made me believe in myself before I did. I would go out there and I would hesitate. I would telegraph. I would basically show what I was going to do before I ever did it. And so I lost every match my first year of wrestling. I think at a year and a half, I won one match by 1 point, and we're heavyweight, so I think he slipped in my sweat probably. But then it started to click, and they helped me become a 10-time state champion. There's 3 styles of wrestling, so a 5-time All-American, a 2-time national champion. Leaving high school, I went straight from my high school wrestling under them to the Olympic Training Center. And I can't tell you how much of a difference and transformation that made in my life, having some sort of outlet, some sort of purpose to focus on. Later, we'll come to find out that didn't really do it for me. I mean, it was something at the time, but what happened was it became my full identity and where I found all my purpose, all my belonging. And I went to the Olympic Training Center, and that was actually pretty short-lived. Remember, I wrestled at Madison Square Gardens against an Olympic bronze medalist, a world champion. And it was a freak accident. We were going out of bounds, and I posted. And right off the wrestling mats, they had that almost black mat that you do squats on, which is pretty sticky. So our hands are sliding off, and then it hit that, and whenever it did, it I snapped my arm. I was laying on the mat like this, but this part of my forearm was behind my shoulder blade. And I broke it, dislocated it, tore the ulnar collateral ligament. And we had to kind of not argue, but petition with the insurance company to get me a world-class elbow surgeon for athletes to do my surgery. I was living at the Olympic Training Center, and some reason they were wanting to send me to mostly a knee and ankle doctor. So for those 4 months, I was given Oxycontin. And in 2005, we didn't nearly know as much about oxy and opiates as we do now. After the surgery, I was doing rehab and trying to save my career. One of the things that really stood out, that rocked me to my core and sent me into this spiral with the addiction, was I only had a 30% chance to ever compete again. My dream was to be a fighter, and I hadn't even done that yet. So I had 3 different doctors writing me 90, 120, 120 every month. So almost a limitless supply with no real oversight was just a recipe for disaster. But in this time, I'd already won a national championship in wrestling. Sorry, I don't see my advancing slides. So what happened after that was I started coaching MMA fighters, heavyweights that were getting ready, and I would be their wrestling coach. And so while I was making this comeback to wrestling, I was helping these guys getting ready for sometimes the main event at the Hard Rock or a main event in Las Vegas. Anytime someone was fighting Brock Lesnar, I was usually getting a call. So I helped Frank Mir and Frank Mir both times, Shane Carwin, Randy Couture, Alistair Overeem, anytime they were fighting this guy, Brock Lesnar, a national champion in wrestling. And from there, I got my first fight. We're all good. Thank you, though. Yeah, thank you. How that happened was I was actually going to the weigh-ins, and then all of a sudden I got off the plane to see my fighter at the weigh-ins. My fighter, my friend, I was his corner man, was in the emergency room. He had a terrible staph infection. So I was the one that went to the weigh-ins and the press conference to tell him he's not showing up. His opponent started talking a lot of trash. The promoter had seen me wrestle. He said, "I'm going to pay you." And I go, "Yes, I'll take the fight." So I stepped on the scale, took the fight, ended up winning about a minute and a half. So that childhood dream became a reality. The second fight was a little bit more of the same. My guy had a 102-degree fever. I stepped on the scale, took the fight on a one-day notice. So it's kind of like, in my mind at least, this is fate. This is what I always wanted to do. You know, I'm finally getting this shot and this chance and this opportunity. This is what I'm supposed to do. Third fight, I was in Iowa, and I was actually in the crowd. I don't suggest this to anyone, and it's not allowed anymore for sure to come out of the crowd and take a fight. But I was the third row back, and I was 2.5 beers in, and the co-main event got canceled because the fighter was a no-show. And so the heavyweight and the promoter gets inside the cage, and they're apologizing to the fans, going to give him a refund or a ticket for the next show that he's fighting on. And that's not good for fight business. So the crowd was much different than this crowd. There was booing, there was cussing. No, don't do any cussing, but can I hear some booing? I've never been able to do this. Boo! Hey, there we go. Hey, it worked. Awesome. I've always wanted to try that, I think. Thank you for playing along. And so that's not good for fight business. So the heavyweight grabbed the microphone and said, "Hey, I came here to fight tonight. I apologize to the fans, but if there's anyone over 206 pounds that happens to have some MMA experience, stand up, raise your hand. Let's give the crowd something to see." So I looked at my friend, and he said, "Oh, no." And he goes, "What are you thinking?" And I shrug, and I chug, and I finish that third beer, and I stand up and just raise my hand. And I asked my buddy, "You ready to be a corner man?" He had no MMA experience, wrestling, anything like that. I went to the back, and I'll make this story fast, but when I went to the back, I'm in jeans and cowboy boots, like a lot of people in the crowd. If you could imagine, the crowd was not knowing, who just stood up. Is this hillbilly going to a slaughter? And some MMA fans would really like that. So half the crowd was still for him, half the crowd all of a sudden was for this guy, this nobody coming out of the crowd. And so I go to the back. I have to find a pair of shorts to borrow, a boil and bite mouthpiece. Luckily, in the staff room, there was a coffee pot, and tried to boil that thing in there. And I try to make it out to the cage. This might be a little bit too much details, but the refs do a cup check to make sure you have your protective gear on. I tried to get by without that. They sent me back. I had to find one. There was a light heavyweight fighter that had fought 3 rounds, so I had to wear this sweaty jock. Which might be why it was my shortest fight ever. Luckily, I was able to finish the fight in about 16 seconds. And this is actually what put me on the map with the UFC. So now all of a sudden I'm getting calls, like, get ready for a pay-per-view, or I take other fights because the pay-per-views didn't come to fruition. But about a year later, I got invited on the Ultimate Fighter TV show. And I was the youngest guy at the highest level. And from there, I made my UFC debut. And to summarize just some of the fighting stuff was I ended up being put in the Black Belt Magazine Hall of Fame. When I was 13 years old, 12, 13 years old, I would buy the Black Belt magazines with Chuck Norris on it or Bruce Lee on it. And those guys I idolized. And by the way, there is my fiance, Amy, that's in the room, and she's on that picture right there. And so I love you, babe. Thank you for being here. And she also said, don't just show pictures of you beating people up. At least show a picture of you getting punched in the face. So the thing that was hard about this transition was it didn't fulfill me. I remember I was still fighting this addiction, even while I was winning. I was fighting this Oxycontin addiction. The thing that was actually, at least in my mind, my warped mind at the time, that was good about it was I didn't get a hangover and I didn't have a lot of pain and I could still somewhat function. I could hide it. I could live that part of my life, keep that in the dark until I couldn't. And there was this moment I went into the best fight team in the world. Literally, the guys were my idols or heroes. I had their posters on my wall as a kid, all through high school. Rashad Evans, George St. Pierre, a bunch of other, I see some heads nodding. Some of the greats, some of the Hall of Famers. And I walk into training, and everyone's looking at me different. And the coach, his name's Trevor Whitman. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame too. MMA Coach of the Year a couple years ago. He brought me into his office and he said, hey, we just took a vote. It was 34-1, 33-1 or 34-1. You got to go. I was the only one that voted to keep you here. At the time, I was training for the main event at the Hard Rock in Las Vegas. And the only place I could find to train was a high school wrestling team that I could volunteer at. Now I'm an elite world-class pro fighter getting ready for one of the biggest things in my life at that point. 23 years old, and I'm just inside a broken attic. I would get my hand raised and I would think, is this it? Is that all? Like, there's got to be something more. And I took that fight, and I just remember I had this terrible stomach pain, and I got kneed right in the stomach. And I was nauseous. I threw up like I've never thrown up in my life after that fight. I didn't know it at the time, but I basically burnt a hole in my stomach. It was an ulcer from all the opiates. And after that, it got real dark real quick. I think I remember specifically thinking, this is getting my hand raised, so what? Now what? And I couldn't get out of there faster. It was the biggest, absolute joyless, get me out of here feeling I've ever experienced in my life. I remember I hid. I went to my room and I just had a handle of tequila and some pills. And then after that, it was this downward spiral of missing my best friend's wedding. Not just missing his wedding, but missing being his best man. A guy who I would, in my right state of mind, only want to be there for and show up for I left this dark cloud. I disappeared. And I had so many voicemails, and his voicemail I'll never forget. I can't believe you missed my wedding. I can't believe my best man didn't show up. Are you okay? Are you alive? There was a suicide attempt there, and there was also a second suicide attempt. And I haven't really leaned in and shared that story, but I remember I went down to Mexico with a one-way ticket with no plans to come back. And when I was there, I just knew a one-way ticket, no plans to come back. Like, it's not going to be my family that finds me. I was planning this stuff out. And I remember I took equivalent to 80 Oxycontin, which is almost 3 prescription pill bottles. And I drank an entire handle of tequila, 5 of the strongest Xanax known that they make. And I sat back on the bed, and everything just went numb. Like, my motor skills started to slow. I got cold. If I would have tried to speak, I wouldn't have been able to. And I just sat there, and I fell back, and I just waited to die. And I was okay with it. That was about noon or 2 p.m. in between that time frame. The next morning, I woke up, and it was to a gasp. And the thought of, how the hell am I alive? And as I gathered my thoughts, I just remember thinking, get in the water. When I went to Mexico, I checked in at a beachfront hotel, and I just remember, get in the water. And so I'm in my clothes, and I go out, and I remember I just knelt down in the sea, and the waves were washing over me. And every wave was another wave of shame. It was shame after wave, shame after shame. And it was, how selfish. Well, first it was, you're a failure. You can't even succeed at that. The second one was probably like, you're so selfish. Somebody was going to find you and have to experience that trauma. And then it was another wave, and my eyes were closed, and I remember I'm smelling this salt water, and it's pushing me back, and I'm tasting my tears coming down my eyes, and my eyes are closed, and it's about 6 a.m. Sun hasn't come up yet, and I'm on my knees, and it's another wave, and it's, what are you doing to your mom? And I just have my eyes closed, and some whisper in my soul, something outside of myself, something greater than me, a voice was in my heart, just felt like it was going to explode, like I might still die. And this whisper said, be grateful for that beating heart in your chest. And I thought, I'm grateful for this beating heart in my chest. And then another whisper in my soul said, be grateful for that breath in your lungs. And I remember I go, and thought, I'm grateful for the breath in my lungs. And then another whisper just said, open your eyes. And when I opened my eyes, I watched the most majestic sunrise I have ever seen in my entire life. Right when I opened my eyes, the sun appeared on the horizon, and it was like a masterful painter painting his masterpiece right before my eyes. And I just cried and thought, wow, I didn't think I would see another sunrise again. And wow, you're telling me this happens every day? Twice a day? Wild. And I've never actually sat and took true appreciation and had complete presence with that moment and thought, like, I'm grateful. And something shifted in me watching that sunrise. I was like, whoa, there's got to be something more. And that set me on a trajectory to say, I'm going to get help. I'm going to get clean. I'm going to actually, in fight camp, preparing for an opponent, like, you take it serious. you take it serious and you throw the kitchen sink at it. And I hadn't gotten any training, tools, techniques, tactics at all to deal with the biggest opponent of my life, which was addiction and depression, suicidal tendencies. And when I got back home, there was actually a group. Well, I'll share that in a second. But I got back home and a dad reached out. And this dad reached out and he asked if I would come visit his son. And that picture will come up in a second. But he had a traumatic brain injury. And he had watched The Ultimate Fighter. And he was 12 years old. His name was Bryce. He said, will you come visit my son? So I went to the Colorado Children's Hospital. I visited his son. And I saw this little warrior that was fighting for his life. And he was much more of a warrior than I was, right, in the fights that I had been fighting. And also it was a little bit awkward because all he could do was moan in agony because of his pain, and he didn't even know I was in the room. And so I got down and I took a picture, and I took a picture with his brother and his mom and his dad. And when I was leaving there, the chaplain, I think, or their pastor, he followed me out and asked how I was doing. I said, I don't know. Like, why was I even in the room? He's not going to remember I was there. And I remember he kind of scolded me, kind of like a good teacher would. He said, hey, stop that. Stop being selfish. You did a good thing today, and you should do it more. And one of the nurses at the nurses station handed me a pamphlet and said, you should come volunteer on the oncology unit. And again, I got to start seeing more and more people who were much stronger fighters, bigger warriors, and this started to transform and change my life, where I started volunteering there 3 days a week, 5 days a week, 7 days a week. And then in this time, I started to kind of come alive with purpose through service, and started to develop and deepen a relationship with God for the first time in my entire life. And there was actually a group that was kind of similar to this, young adults, 20 to 30 years old or 18 to 30. And they would volunteer all around Colorado or Denver. And they took mission trips and they did other stuff. And it was this 55-day summer program that I did. And in that moment, I started volunteering at the Denver Rescue Mission. I started volunteering at the at-risk youth group. And my heart was just set on fire. It came alive. I had a community of people making an impact all around me. They were just driven for purpose, service, belonging, and they had hope. And then about 11 months later, I find out that volunteering, 11 months from my last fight, I find out volunteering doesn't pay the bills. And can anyone relate to that? I see a few hands. But I wouldn't have changed anything ever. And my fight manager calls me and he says, what are you doing for money? And I literally had not an eviction notice, but it was like a warning, hey, pay up. It's time. And I'm like, shoot, what am I going to do? Fighters only get 1, 2, 3 paychecks in an entire year. So I would normally fight and pay 6 months of rent, And so he called me with basically a golden rope or an opponent on a silver platter, a fighter that fights like I do, but we believed that I was better at it than he was. And so all fights are dangerous, but this was kind of the least dangerous fight you can take. And it was at the Saitama Super Arena in Tokyo, Japan, which is in front of 100,000 people live. And I think we can, could you hit, here, I'll come do it real fast. Y'all are all good. Thank y'all so much. Let's see. There we go. This was actually my dream fight. So number 3 on my goals list as a kid was fight in the UFC, or actually win a national championship in wrestling. Number 2 was fight in the UFC. Number 1 was fight at the Saitama Super Arena in Tokyo, Japan on New Year's Eve. and this was the offer. But I was around this new group of young people and young adults and mentors and friends and people in ministry and people in the nonprofit sector that were making impact. And something in my soul said, not yet. And I asked them, and they go, maybe you're ready, but have you prayed about it? And I was like, well, no, do I really need to? Like, I got some money problems. And they're like, yeah, you should probably do that if you're unsettled, right? If you're thinking one way or the other, that's what you should probably do. And so I remember I said this prayer, and I was alone, and through the encouragement of others, I just said, God, what do you want me to do with my life? If I could go a little deeper in explaining it, like I was kind of scattered. I was doing this, and that, anywhere, everywhere. And I had my head on a swivel looking to make a difference. But that was a little bit of a shotgun approach. And I think I needed direction, like maybe more of like a sniper, like something in the sights or the scope. And is it this fight or is it something else? So God, what do you want me to do with my life? And it sounds out there. It sounds a little wild and crazy. But in that moment, like this vision dropped around me. And it was stronger than any visualization I'd ever done with a sports psychologist or Olympic gold medalist. And I saw myself in the rainforest, walking down a footpath, hearing drumming, hearing singing, coming to a clearing. And I saw this guy that was emaciated. You could see every single one of his ribs through his skin, and you could count them. And he was coughing. And I knew that he was sick and hungry and thirsty and poor and oppressed and enslaved, and that he felt forgotten. And I saw these twig and leaf dome huts. And I came out of that vision. And honestly, I think 2024 is when I've started to finally get comfortable, maybe 2023, sharing this story on a microphone. Because after that moment, I thought, are you crazy? Like, what was that? I mean, I know I said a prayer, but at least in Colorado or Austin, Texas, where I come from, like, if you have some like psilocybin or magic mushrooms, like you could at least point to that of why you had a vision. And this wasn't that. This was 11 months sober, and this was me saying a prayer, and then something happening. Not the clouds opening up and the voice of God speaking to me, but I asked, and then something happened. I had an experience. And I wrote it down, forgotten, at the top of the piece of paper, underlined it. I wrote down, and I wrote this down: forgotten, hungry, thirsty, poverty, sick, oppressed, enslaved, that they felt like the forgotten people or forgotten by God. And for 3 days, I basically said, I'm not going to tell a soul. I made this inner vow. Like, people will think this is too out there, too crazy. I can't say it. But 3 days after that vision, I get invited to something basically exactly like this. And there's a speaker. And the speaker of, we'll call them Forge Talks instead of Trey Talks, but was Caleb. And Caleb shares his story of living with a Maasai, of GPS coordinates of basically unknown or unreached tribes. And that he lived in Vanuatu with the tribe that invented bungee jumping. And he shared his story, his testimony, his ministry, and the nonprofit kind of aid work that he was doing to like bring hope and health and like a better future to these people. And after it, I thought, or I just felt this sense of like, he's who you got to tell. And so there was people talking to him, and my friend was ready to go. And so I jumped in his truck, actually his car, a van. And whenever I got in there, when that ignition started, I was like, wait, hold on. I got to go tell this guy something. And I go back in and I take my phone number. I ripped out a piece of paper. And I tried to give him my phone number. And he was wrapping up. And he goes, you got something to tell me? I go, yeah, but you can call me in like a week or two. Like, I know you just spoke, so like, give it some time. And he's like, no, man, I'm here. If you have something to tell me now. And so I'm really nervous. I didn't want to tell anyone this, but I tell him the vision, and he cracks a smile when I wrapped it up. And I go, I'm like waiting. He goes, I know who they are. That was his first words. I know who they are. I'm like, what? He goes, those are the pygmy people. And I said, who? He goes, they're in the Congo Basin rainforest that spans across 8 or 9 African nations. I was like, where? And he goes, I'm going in 3 weeks. You're coming with me. And I said, whoa. And instead of getting in his vehicle, or my friend's vehicle, I got in his truck, Caleb's truck. And as we're driving to his house, he's like, you got to tell my wife this. And he said, on the day I had the vision, the rebels took over the airport. It was a 1 million person city. They were killing people, all sorts of terrible atrocities I won't get into. And the next day, the U.S. State Department said no American for any reason go there. Next day after that was his team, 3 other men going with him, were husbands, fathers. They canceled their trips. And so before Caleb spoke, his wife, Jess, said, if you don't get a sign, you're not going to go. You're not going alone. And so he spoke. I heard the vision. I tell him the vision. Or he spoke. I heard his story. I tell him the vision. And we walk into their house, and Jess is pregnant. She's got a toddler named Trace running around. And I'm like, I can't tell her. And Caleb pulls it out of me. I say it. And then all of a sudden she looks at Caleb and says, you got to take this guy. And I'm like, what? Can we postpone it next year? Like when things calm down? And then they became kind of like life coaches. If you don't go, you'll never know. You always wonder what coulda, shoulda, would have happened. And I remember I left there thinking like that is probably my biggest fear. Like always having that big question mark. What woulda, coulda, shoulda happened. As we end up going 3 weeks later, this is what it looked like. We took many different planes. When we got to Uganda, luckily there was the first pilot said no. They pointed us in the direction of MAF, Missions Aviation Fellowship. They decided to take us. They just buzzed in, landed, and then got out of there. And we took a truck 4 to 6 hours through the rainforest. We slept in this mud hut. The next day we woke up and we went on motorcycles through the rainforest. We got to the river. There's literally crocodiles and hippos in this river down the stream a bit. And we got to aim way left just to end up there. And because it's pushing us back and we don't want to go that way. And so we get across and we start hiking. And we hike for about 30, 45 minutes. And then we hear drumming. And then we hear singing. And then we come into a clearing. And the first guy we see, you can count his ribs. And he's coughing. And he has tuberculosis. And I get so dizzy. It was this deja vu times 100 or 1,000 moment that I was weak in the knees. I had to take a knee. And Caleb, sorry, but he was grabbing my trap like this, whispering to me, this is your vision. This is your vision, bro. And we had my buddy Colin with us, and they both knew the vision and had seen it written down, and I told them all about it. And it wasn't 90% of it. It was 100% of the vision came true. Blew my mind, changed my whole perspective on life. Nothing like that has happened necessarily since, but it happened. We drove through the rainforest in this truck, and then we hiked through like this, and this is where we went. Deep, deep, deep into the rainforest. And as we got there, we saw these beautiful faces. But I remember about 2 weeks in, I asked Caleb, I'm like, I was actually overwhelmed with the suffering. There's people that were hungry and thirsty, and slave masters came up to us. What are you doing with my property? I own these people. All sorts of stuff that on maybe the second to last day, Caleb said, so what are you going to do? So what do you mean, what am I going to do? You have an organization. You do this kind of stuff. Like, I'm a fighter. What am I going to do? They're saying they need land and water and food. He said, you had a vision. You're standing in it right now. And I said, yeah, but Caleb, the visual I get after this vision is it's like trying to empty the ocean with an eyedropper. Would it ever matter? Would it actually count? would they ever notice? Would I ever notice if I dedicated my life to this thing for the rest of my life? I haven't bought land for myself in my own country. How am I going to do it somewhere else? Um, and I remember he kind of jolted me out of it, kind of like that chaplain. And he kind of scolded me. He was frustrated. You're standing in your vision. What more do you need? And he said, Justin, every single one of those drops represents a human heart, somebody's name. And I remember he pointed at a kid and said, his smile, that child's smile. And that like shifted my perspective of like, whoa. So he said, does it matter? Yes, it matters. Every single drop. After that, we came home, and actually I told him I just need something a little bit more, some kind of confirmation. He got more frustrated. He said, what more could you need? And I said, I don't know, but if I get it, I'll dedicate my life to this thing. And so I go, I just need something simple, practical, tangible that I can do. Not something like pie in the sky or false promises. I'm not going to give them false promises and give them hope only for it to like fall flat and broken trust. And so the next day, and we got to see these kids here, and I actually can't see exactly what's coming up next, but they're hunter-gatherers. This is Chief Leo May. And on the day we're getting ready to leave, it was either the day before or the day we're leaving, he comes up to us and we're saying bye. And I'm in the middle of Caleb and Colin. And he says, we don't have he actually said, everyone else calls us the forest people, but we call ourselves the forgotten. And when he said that, I was like, whoa, because forgotten. And he said, we don't have a voice. Can you help us have one? And like, that was the one tangible thing that I could say yes to. I'm an American. I have free speech. Thank God for that. I have some sort of platform. I can fight, win, grab the microphone, tell a little bit of their story. I have friends that have podcasts. I can go on their shows and share it with a big group and audience. By the way, those are their stools. You got to sit on them carefully. And then that's his grandfather's spear. The poison-tipped arrows there, but when he said forgotten, it just melted my soul. My second trip, I decided to reach out to probably the foremost expert on the Pygmy people in the world. He had been living with them since the year I was born, 1987. I call him Papa Y. I came to call him Papa Y, but it was just Y, spelled W-A-Y, way, but pronounced Y. I reached out to him. He said, what are you going to do? What do you want to do? And you have to have something practical, tangible that you can do. And I said, I don't know. I think I need to learn more. I think I need, if I could live with them. If you hear a stat, it goes in one ear and out the other. If you read about it, it might really touch you. But if you see it and experience it and feel it like I did those few weeks, like he's like, okay, come back for 6 weeks. What are your goals? 4 goals: live with, listen to, learn from, love them. And that hopefully through living their way of life, we'll find a way to really help them practically, tangibly, let them know that they're actually truly loved. And so on my second trip with Papa Y, I met Namboli. Namboli was the first, actually seeing her doing this work, it was the first time I was super struck to my core of like what modern day slavery is, and that there are over 40 million slaves on earth today, more than ever in human history. Like, we think it's a thing of the past. We think it's something in the 1800s. And it's like, it's not. It's like here now, today, thriving. And it's terrible. I also was about 2 or 3 days before I was leaving this time, and I'd circled back and came back to the village that I'd stayed with originally. And there was a young boy named Andy Bo. And whenever I got back to the village, they brought me inside with his mother. And I remember I could see his mother, sometimes they live a very traditional way of life. So she wasn't wearing a shirt. She had the skirt on, and you could count. And plus she had been breastfeeding, but you could count every single rib on her sternum because she was starving. And I was sitting there, and she was cupping the back of his head and holding his little hand, and she grabbed my hand and put it under his head, and I held his little hand. And he had turned for the worse really fast. And blood came out of his ears, and he took his last breath, and he died. And that wrecked me, just because he didn't have clean water and because of discrimination. Andy Bo's mom took him to the hospital not once but twice. First time when she got there, the nurses told her, "You're too dirty to come in here," because there's discrimination against the Pygmy people. The Mabuti, the Batwa, the Efe, the Baka, the Aka, the Bayaka, no matter what country they're in, they normally suffer the same oppression and systematic discrimination. Second time she took him, it was $1 for the pills, $3 for the cure, and it was they had $3.50 of Congolese franc to pay. They had a chicken, they had eggs, they had firewood, they had charcoal. They took everything they could because they don't get paid in money. They begged for that small amount of money. An entire tribe, probably about 150 people. And when they got there, the doctor said the real reason, which is we won't waste our medicine on a pygmy animal, and turned them away. And that forever changed my life. That was like the next thing. Give them a voice. Second thing is, let's knock out the water crisis. This moment for me, like I honestly kind of despise or hate the picture, but one of our who would come to be a well driller for us took that photo so that I would remember it and remember them and not forget about the forgotten. And after that, I came home and thought, okay, we're going to try to drill wells. And I did what anyone with a smartphone would do. I went to Google and put in howtodrillyourOwnWell.org. And I went to Home Depot and I went to Lowe's, and I started trying to drill these wells that weren't going to work there at all. But I got in a little bit of success, and some people had heard about what I was doing. And this video went viral of me with some of the kiddos. And I was the first Mzungu, or guy with white skin that they had ever seen. And they were playing with my beard and my hair. And so it ended up on Jimmy Kimmel saying, look at Justin Wren, UFC fighter, being pet like a golden retriever. The next day I was on TMZ, and I was in real good company right behind Lindsay Lohan and right before Honey Boo Boo. Does anyone remember Honey Boo Boo? It's at least a funny name. And then Joe Rogan asked me to come on a show and talk about it, and said, what do you need? And I had left fighting on a little bit, not like a huge stage, huge name, but I'd left on a little bit of a winning streak and at a young age. And so it confused people. It confused my dad. My dad was gung-ho about my fighting, and I wouldn't really share this publicly outside of this place, but I remember him saying, you're a waste of talent. You know, and I had found this purpose. I'd found service, and I found something I was actually going to do, and some people I was actually going to help outside of myself. Fighting had been so selfish for me. And Joe invited me on, and he gave me an opportunity. And before I got off of that, he said, what do you need? I said, well, we have this crowdfunding campaign, and I need about $60,000 to live there for a year. And we're going to try to drill we're trying to get 20 acres of land and drill 2 water wells with that. For people that don't have it. And before I was off the show, there was $78,000 donated. And it was just like one thing after another were just happening. So then I took 1 ton of well drilling equipment. Actually, sorry, that was when I got to Uganda, but I took 15 check bags, and the airlines just comped it, said you don't have to pay for it. And I have augers and single prong and triple prong chisels and chains and winches and all sorts of stuff packed exactly to 50 pounds or 49.9 pounds, 15 of them. And I decided to go fly and live there for a year. And I can't tell you how much that lit my soul on fire. It put my life on purpose and set my soul on fire. And this was my home for the year. My door was on the left. That was the palm leaf they just put in front of the hole. The dirt was my bed. The fire was my blanket. Actually, I don't normally share this, but in that hut, it was a year, right? So a lot of things can happen. My record was pulling 5 roaches out of my beard in one night. The chief pulled a black mamba from coming inside of it. I was about 3 feet from it. I got stung by something called a death stalker scorpion, death stalker or death trotter, one of those two. But I had been, and I got malaria. I lost 33 pounds in 5 days. Um, and but before I got malaria, we were drilling these wells, and every single well failed. We'd gotten some land, and it went from 20 acres to 60 acres to 100 acres to like more and more. Like they needed to own the land before we drilled wells on it, because then they could be pushed off of it, right? And so we were getting some success with land, but every time we went to drill a well, I was a white belt well driller trying to teach other white belts how to drill a well. It just wasn't going to work. And these moments of being out there, this is kind of how we did it with these tripods and these ropes and winches and pulleys and the augers. There's not a picture of the auger in there, but we would hike in bags of bricks, bags of cement, bags of sand, bags of gravel, and 20-foot long pipes. And we would pick up and move a football field and start again. And we would hit these collapsing zones that just were like, what is going on? We would get 50 feet, 60 feet, 70 feet deep. We'd take a lunch break and we'd come back and the hole would be 2 foot deep, or it collapsed in on itself. And so I was getting discouraged with the guys, and I thought I did the very thing I said I would never do: give them hope and not be able to deliver, to break their trust. And I remember everybody coming around, and then just another failure and another failure. And when I got malaria and I lost 33 pounds in 5 days, I was vomiting red and green, which is blood and bile. I had something called black water fever. I think 25% to 50% of the people that get that die. My liver was failing, my kidneys were failing, and I got evac'd out of Congo into Uganda. And when I was sitting there, I thought, oh boy, like I might be about to die. My mom called me. Sandy saw my mom call earlier, and I showed it to her. It says, best mom ever. And she called, I called her from a sat phone, and she said, come home. Like, that's why we got insurance, come home. And I said, Mom, they don't know how to treat people for malaria in the US. Like, they see it every day here. They see it every day here. And I know I'm supposed to be here. She goes, why? And I go, because I had a vision. I know I'm supposed to stay. And I talked to Papa Y, my mentor, and he said, Justin, if you leave right now, the team and the people will lose hope. We have a chance here. Don't forget who or why and who you're fighting for. We named it Fight for the Forgotten for a reason. It's a fight. But we're not done yet. And I remember he said, he just gave me a little bit of hope. He said, I'm going to call someone. And they've had some wins and successes, and maybe he'll call you and give you some advice of like some changes to make in the well drilling process. Well, yeah, Papa Y said, don't remember why and who you're fighting for. And then that's when B-Tech entered the picture. B-Tech was a guy that had over 100 wins under his belt of water well drilling. Papa Y's in the middle, B-Tech's on the left, and these two guys are my heroes, absolutely heroes. They've loved me like a brother and like a son. And B-Tech didn't just call me, he showed up. He rolled up his sleeves. He's Ugandan, and he went into Congo, actually two hostile countries towards each other. He almost died they almost put a tie around him, tried to burn him because he had a car accident. It's called mob justice. But he decided to stay because he wanted to help us get some success. And B-Tech just made, I wouldn't say one small change. There was one major small change, but everything that we did, like a little small change here, a little small change here, and sometimes it's just the smallest changes that make the biggest difference. We put this platform up, and we got on it, and we were able to use our body weight. We were 10 feet off the ground, and we were standing on it and using our weight and drilling, and it would push down through the collapsing zones. And we had this casing pipe, and it would prevent it from collapsing in on itself. And we started to get to 50 feet, 60 feet, 70 feet, 80 feet, 100 feet deep. And we're using hand augers. And we finally started to have some hope coursing through our bodies. And I was looking at B-Tech for some sort of sign, and he finally cracked a grin, and like water just started coming and started coming up. And I just remember that moment and how incredibly happy I was, but that can't do anything compared to the pictures. And I hope you can see some of the faces in the celebration. But these faces here, seeing water for the very first time, this might be the best face ever right there. I remember that first success, like Mother Earth had finally rewarded our efforts. And I remember standing there just being like, wow, at long last, like we did it. It was one of the happiest, most joyful moments of my entire life. I remember we cried and we danced and we sang until the sun came up. And then one victory turned into another victory. And then this might be the best face ever. This is a grandfather seeing clean water for the first time, right? His wife pumping water. I think his thought was, there's been water under our feet the whole time. I remember he asked me that, and I'm like, yeah. This was one of our last water wells to drill. B-Tech and I, or B-Tech still at it 13 years later. Actually, I guess this was maybe 11 years later. And, never seen it do that. I might fast forward through the story a little bit because I do want to save some time for like Q&A with y'all. But I wanted to show y'all that it's just grown and grown and grown. Like from that first water well all those years ago, now we've been able to do 85 water wells, providing clean water to more than 52,000 people in some of the most remote places on Earth. We've been able to purchase and buy back more than 3,000 acres of land for them. In the last couple of years, we've built 35 family homes for a new group of the Pygmy people, the Batwa, that are in Uganda on the border of Congo. And we've helped replant tens of thousands of trees, started 4 sustainable farms, and we've seen probably what I'm most excited about is we've seen more than 1,800 people transition out of a life of actual slavery and into a life of freedom. And that's probably been the biggest joy. Now we're getting ready to build a hospital and a school and a community hub and a guest house to where it can be Fight for the Forgotten's like base camp, like basically like mission house in Uganda, right on the border of Congo. And we're just stoked about that. But as I come kind of towards a close and so that we can get into like Q&A and have conversation, a little community and fellowship, I wanted to show this picture because B-Tech had an incredible take on it. This moment, some of the kids came up, this is in Uganda, and they had this kind of nasty rope, and they wanted to play tug of war. And I said, sure, when it was like 3 or 4 or 5 kids. But then whenever it got to 10, 11, 12, 15, I was like, uh-oh. Because in my mind, I thought I would just kind of play with them and pull them around a bit and then eventually let them win. But they dominated me. I have the grass stains still on those pants from where they drug me around the dirt. And here is Ivan's face. It's not zoomed in enough, but he's got one of the best faces ever as well. And B-Tech asked him, said, what can we learn from this? And I remember the things that came out of kids' mouths and how beautiful and profound it was. They said, whenever we unite and fight, we can defeat giants. Whenever we come together, we can move mountains. Whenever we come together, we can overcome any challenge. I was blown away. After that, there was a Swahili proverb that I absolutely love, and these are my heroes. These are the people that make it happen, the boots on the ground, the ones that just honestly taught me how to live a better life and live outside of myself. There's a Swahili proverb, and y'all might have heard of it, but it's if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I actually think that could be something adopted by Trey, right? Because you're already doing it. But there's always an opportunity to do it even more. You don't have to do this alone. You never do. Like God has put people in your life and in your circle and in your community. Like you're not alone. How could you possibly be alone? It's so they live this. It's in their DNA. It's who they are. And I just absolutely love that Swahili proverb. Another one is, if you think you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping in a closed room with a mosquito. And that one's tongue in cheek, but that is the proverb that Papa Y told me whenever I called him. Actually, when I was in Uganda with malaria, I called him and I said, Papa Y, I think I'm out of gas. I'm leading people astray. I'm like giving them hope. And he said, well, you have malaria. Let me tell you a Swahili proverb. If you think you're too small to make a difference, try to sleep in a closed room with a mosquito. And then it kind of hit different as I reflected upon it. Through my unique kind of, lens on life, I've gotten to fight guys 6'7", 6'8", 6'10". And I won those fights, luckily and gratefully. But a little mosquito, actually a parasite, something microscopic inside of a mosquito, kicked my tail more than any heavyweight fighter ever could. So if that's true, like how much more of a difference can you make? Can we make when we come together? It's like so much more than we ever give ourselves credit for. It's so much more than we ever give ourselves credit for and even pray for. So I love that one. And then part of our motto or our saying as Fight for the Forgotten is opportunity is greater than charity. Charity can be great, but opportunity is just always better. Like for me personally, and this is just a little bit of my heart, is like I've seen charity done wrong. Like when helping can actually hurt. And like the difference between a hand out and a hand up, it's wild. And so sometimes people do things with great intentions, their heart's in the right place, but the long-term effect can actually be discouraging and disempowering for communities. So how can we do it better? Not just give back, but give better, and things continuing to grow. So I started with Mama Mariama. I thought that would be a beautiful place to end because this video I've seen many times and it still brings a tear to my eyes. This was Mama Mariama's drinking source. And this was the worst water source I'd ever seen people drink from. This was also during the dry season. And so the moss and the algae is brutal. But if you remember, she's blind. There's no way she can do that walk. And her children couldn't go to school. They didn't have the money to pay for school fees. There wasn't a school in the area, but also like this was what they had to do every day, even if there was a school. They also had to rock climb for water. And this is pretty wild to think about. Barefoot, a jerry can in your hand. Jerry cans are 44 pounds when full. It's 5 gallons. It is 20 liters. So if you think about a kettlebell, right? Actually like a bigger kettlebell. That's what these women and children are doing that with. That one's empty there. She's also got her cup in her hand. So it's very unsafe and it's wet. Children doing the same walk. And so I wanted Mama Mariamo to share her story with you.
My name is Mariamu. I have 2 children that are alive. The other 5 children died. In my life, I once had good eyes. I was well. I could walk well. I could see my children. Still to this day, I don't know what took my vision. To always have to send people to get water for you is a problem. My life belongs to them.
water is life. When someone use the good water, you have opportunity. His life can go very far.
Asante. Mungu abariki. Mungu abariki mali. Mimi naweza kunywa mali. Mungu asifiwe.
As I knelt in the sea in Mexico with those waves washing over me, and I watched that majestic sunrise. It was as if the water itself was giving me, and God was giving me a second chance at life. As I was getting ready to leave the rainforest that first time with Caleb, I remember being overwhelmed with my smallness, questioning how could I ever make a difference. And he reminded me, every single drop matters. And as I stood by Mama Mariamo, as she pumped clean, beautiful, life-changing, clean water for the very first time, I realized she was one of those drops, and that she matters so very, very much. What a privilege for me to be able to experience that beautiful moment with her. And what a privilege for me to be able to share her with you. And I'm not asking you guys to uproot your lives and move to the middle of the rainforest. Frankly, they don't want us all there anyways. But I will remind us that we can all make a difference in some way. We can all fight for something. We can all fight for someone, even if that fight is just for one drop. So I'll end with where I began and ask you, what meaningful impact would you make if you only knew you could? Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Wow, that's so nice.
As Justin said, does anybody have any questions? He said something about Q&A. You got questions? Anybody? No? No question? Yeah, go ahead, Amelia.
Yeah, Joe, can you all hear me up there? Yeah, you want me to do this? What? I'm still going to do it. Thank you. What's Joe Rogan really like in person? He's awesome. I think my second date with Amy, we went to his show, second, third, something like that. Early on, we went to his show with Dave Chappelle, and I remember we were backstage in the green room, and then we went to this like after party with him, and we're sober, and we're having like just being around those people is pretty cool. But like he was, do you remember he was like intentionally coming over and like checking in with you and having conversations and just being really nice. And so he has been one of our greatest supporters both financially, but also through raising awareness. And so being able to go on, there was this one time I got to go on his podcast and say, we have this matching gift. And then it was like, not every time I go on there, it's like a big surge. And that's how, as a nonprofit, we've like survived, is basically we've had well over 10,000 or tens of thousands, like small time donors that have given $5 or $10 or $15. But I remember I said this thing about a matching gift once, and it was like, boom, like, so he has had me on there 9 times. If I go back on this year, it'd be my 10th. And so he's just the real deal. Loves his family, loves his kids. I remember he moved to Austin, and he was looking for a new gym to train at. And every time I saw him at the gym, he's bringing his daughter so that she can learn martial arts. And so it's pretty wild that the biggest podcaster can also have, and biggest fight commentator, and a great comedian, and a hunter, and all this other stuff, like, still has these great intimate relationships with his friends and his most importantly, his family, his wife. So they did a comedy fundraiser for us at the Comedy Store in LA. And I got to sit there with Jess, his wife. And so he's the real deal. I think he's really trying his best. He's got a good heart. And he supports his friends in incredible ways. So this honestly, in many ways, wouldn't exist, at least at this level, and survived for 13 years. If it wasn't for him. And now I get to have this full-time focus on it, and it's cool to have people in our corner and have our back. Good question. Thank you. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. So it's wild whenever you get your hand raised, and occasionally people might be, people are cheering when you win, but they might be like chanting your name or yelling, and you hear your name in the crowd, and you can be under the lights, but yet you can actually be in total darkness. And you can get all the praise, yet not feel it at all, or stiff arm it. And you can be around thousands of people, yet feel so alone. And so I think my identity was wrapped up in it, but I also think I wasn't living in alignment with who I felt like I wanted to be, who God created me to be. And it took a long time I wouldn't even say I have that figured out, but I have made massive growth in that area, where if I had to summarize what it took with addiction and depression, actually even Amy helped me with that, like put words to it, which is, with addiction, you have to face it all, feel it all, because that's where the magic happens. And then with depression, like, I was a guy that could love God and I could love people, but I couldn't love myself. And I couldn't allow that to, like, even sometimes his love penetrate that. And so when I learned to love myself like my life depends on it, because for a guy like me it does, that was the birthplace of miracles. Like, that was the birthplace of miracles. Loving God, loving people, and allowing that to also penetrate my heart too. Yeah, I've even been, this might sound a little woo-woo or out there, but I've been falling asleep, and Amy does this, but I took a nap earlier today, and I was like, I love myself. I love myself, and life loves me, and I love life, and it's some good positive, even like truth affirmations, to like strengthen your resolve whenever you get tired or things come up. And yeah. Is that help? Yeah. Thank you. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. So that was our first water well. And I have another picture that's not in this deck, but it's water, beautiful water overflowing out of a mug. And it's one child holding it to another, handing it to another child. That's Mama Mariamo's child's hands that the overflowing water is going into. And in that well pad, in the cement, we wanted to have a way to kind of like keep track of our well logs and basically like every meter of soil, like what was that? So if we have to come back out and do repairs and maintenances, like we know exactly what it was. Like we have a roadmap. They asked us if we would write Mungu anatupa maji, which means God gave us water. And it's pretty awesome. I didn't get to share this, but the FA Pygmy people named me Efeosa. The Mabuti named me Mabuti Mangbo. And the Batwa named me Olengama. And so it's fun to think back about like, if I wouldn't have done this journey and like had these opportunities, like, trust takes time to build. And it happened, I think, quick for me. But anyways, Efeosa means the man who loves us. And like, I cherish that when I think about, hopefully that's a reflection, right? The man who loves us. And then Mabuti Mangbo, the big pygmy. That's my name. So I used to be the Viking in the UFC. Now it's the big pygmy, or on Instagram. And then Olengama, the king in Zito, that was his father's name. And so anyways, I just need to think about all that stuff that comes from the community. Yes. So he said, what is the biggest dream or goal for Fight for the Forgotten? The original vision. And it's funny because you can go ask whether it was Liome, whether it was Jelua, whether it was Bajanji, whether it was Baiwanja, whether it was King Nzito, they have the same vision, no matter where they are. Even if some of them do know each other, some of them don't. And it started with a spear, the spear part here and the stick part in the dirt, and them drawing land, water, food, healthcare, education, jobs. And so that's been the original vision. But it's been like, whoa, there's such a lack of infrastructure. And in Congo, such a lack of security that like kind of buildings, it's like dangerous in Congo. So we over the last 5 years have shifted into Uganda as well. And we've really gone deep. Like we've planted the seedlings and we've seen it sprout and like it's growing. And what we're excited about is sustainable communities, which is really through like providing that opportunity, but what they asked for. So we ask good questions. They make great suggestions. They know their culture, their community, their country better than I ever could, even if I lived there fully the last 13 years, right? So if you actually sit down, listen to them, look at them eye to eye, give them a voice by just giving them your ear, right? Like you're going to get gold, and be able to meet those needs. And so the new land, we're doing farms, but it's land, water. So there's water towers. We're going to have, basically we want to replicate this. The big vision is there's 9 African nations where the Pygmy people live. And so we want to do one sustainable community, and we're already about to buy land for the second community in Uganda. Then we're going to go to Rwanda, and then we might go to Central African Republic, and then we're going to go to Gabon. Then we're going to go to Cameroon. I haven't been to that one. Then go to Cameroon. There's 2 Congos. So we'll probably get back into the Congos with like that, sustainable communities down the road. But we have those relationships still built and ready to go. So the big part is them having land, then a health center, homes, better housing, school, and them having sustainable livelihoods, whatever it is they want to do. Farming, reforestation, sewing. Actually, we just bought sewing machines. Amy started a women's initiative alongside Fight for the Forgotten. It's called Fight for Her. And so that initiative is going to be supporting the maternity ward for them to have safe births at. And so we're trying to finalize this model to where I think it's finalized. It's for sure finalized, but it's like do it, replicate it, scale it, and take it on to other communities in great need. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, sir. You're right there. We're coming over here. Yeah. Forgive, absolutely. Have I had the opportunity? If you didn't hear that, like of the people that where it started and the mean stuff that happened and me being bullied. Now I'm not even just forgiving them; I'm grateful for it, and that's what's cool about allowing your heart to be open, right? And taking those steps of forgiveness. It used to be hard for me. I think even Amy saw me share it sometimes, and I would get kind of shaky, and I would get taken back to it. It would almost be like PTSD, and it would really kind of affect me because I'd go back into it so much. But through some like growth and stuff, did I forgive them? Absolutely, over and over and over and over again. And then it feels like it stuck. And I honestly think this is where my heart for some of the most oppressed and bullied people in the world comes from. I can't relate in the same way, but I can understand a little bit, right? And I think, I think we overcome so we can overflow, right? And those things happen, but they don't have. It can sound cheesy, but I love it. It says, life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. So allowing that to be part of our message, that mess to a message. So did I ever connect with them? Yes. I went, I didn't handle myself in the best way. This was before I ever did any of this other stuff. I was 21. I got off the Ultimate Fighter. There's this big thing at Buffalo Wild Wings, and it's a party for me. And there's fire marshals are turning people away. It's over 1,000 people. And afterwards, I went out with the woman I was dating at the time to a sushi restaurant. And when we walked in, it was the table that was the people who all premeditated and made the invitations and told me those things. So Jennifer, Tyler, Justin, we're all at the table, and they brought us over. And they're like, man, if we would have known you would have been in the UFC, we never would have done those things to you because you could have kicked our A, And I'm like, oh, okay. I don't know that sounds like an apology. In my head, at least, right? Like, yeah, stand up. No, let's go outside. But what's funny is I shrunk back and I felt embarrassed, even though the person I was with didn't even know that story because I wasn't at a place where I could share that story. I went to the bathroom and I texted her. Have I ever told you this, Amy? Yeah. I went to the bathroom and I texted her I wasn't feeling good. Could we go somewhere else to eat or could we just like leave? And so I literally snuck out. There was like the sushi restaurant part, then there's the bar and the restroom. I could kind of sneak around the bar and outside. Like I just bailed because it took me back to that place and they were laughing about it too and going on. Long story short, Tyler's in ministry now. He works with at-risk, underserved youth. And we've connected a couple times over the years. And he's reached out, apologized, asked for forgiveness. I've reached out, said, hey man, love you, bro. It's all in the past, and you're doing great things now. Keep going. So that was a cool thing to see. Yes, sir. That one wasn't my fight. I never got to have that fight. Oh, good question. So one of our, I'll tell you this because it's kind of cool. It all links back together. I came back. I'm still broke as a joke, but things started to happen. And whenever I decided I wanted to start Fight for the Forgotten, our first donor, actually, let me say this. My first trip to go, there's a guy that I knocked out that he heard what I was doing, about to go do. He called me with his wife and said, we're paying for your round trip ticket. I was like, what? So my first mission trip to meet the Pygmy people was paid for by a guy I knocked out. And had a great relationship with afterwards, right? Like you get together and you know this person unlike anyone else knows him. And he knows me that way too. And it's just competition. It's a human chess match. It's a sport. So it was really unique that he sent me there. But when I got back, there's an organization called Project Cure. And Project Cure is the number one nonprofit in the world for donated medical supplies. They have sent billions of dollars overseas, and I think they're in 138 countries this year. Recently, I've been waiting and waiting and waiting to get these designs, get other things going. They were our second donor, but I've waited 13 years to ask them to actually support because we had to have the infrastructure to build it. So they've given us a $2.5 million commitment if we can build it. So we raised the funds for the health center. They're going to put in $2.5 million of medical equipment to us, or we'll be able to take it to other community hospitals that we're in partnership with. Long story short, sorry, why do I keep saying that? The how I got some money, I started speaking in prisons, and I got to go in over 100 different prisons and juvenile detention centers and women's units. And I was in Folsom and San Quentin, and I'd get like $250 or $500. And that story is pretty wild, but I don't know if I got time to share it. Yeah. Yes. There's an oral Bible in their language, but there's lots of languages. In Congo, there's over 200 spoken languages because there's over 200 tribes. In Uganda, I think there's 60 spoken languages because I think there's 60-something tribes. Depends on where you are. Like Congo, there's 5 national languages, one of them being French. Uganda is an English-speaking country. That's what they teach in school. But what I learned was a very broken Swahili, and I've actually lost some to most of that, or most of it. But it was a mix of Swahili. Well, the saying is Swahili was born in Tanzania, got sick in Kenya, died in Uganda, and they took it to Congo to bury it. So I cannot understand like Tanzanian and so it has a mix of the local language, Lingala, their dialect, and they'll say things like merci, mingi, which isn't Asante Sana, but it means the same thing. It means thank you so much. And yeah, there was one more hand there. Yes, sir. Through the what of my life? Well, if I could say it like, well, prayer. If you pray, like, be willing to like listen, and like prayer works. Things happen. Things happen. Amy would even ask me sometimes, like, did you pray about it? Have you prayed? You should pray. And things happen. For instance, why I started speaking in prisons was I said no. So the speaking, or my fight manager came back to me instead of with that fight in Japan, asked, would I speak? And it was actually at the US Air Force Academy. I was like, what? I'm a fighter, not a speaker. I don't have the ability to do that. I grew up, one of the reasons I got bullied was I grew up with a speech therapist from kindergarten to 6th grade. I would have a stutter and a speech impediment. So, and I get nervous to speak. It's easier for me to get in a cage than to stand on a stage or stand in this room and talk to y'all. Isn't that wild? And it just is. So I said no to my first, I think 8 or 9 speaking opportunities, telling my agent, I'm a fighter, not a speaker. I don't have the ability to do that. I talked with a mentor, a spiritual mentor that said, have you prayed about it? And I said, no. And I was in Vegas, and I was very resistant to it. I was in Vegas going to Denver, back home. And he said, you should pray about it. I go, okay, maybe. And he goes, right, you should pray about it right now. I go, I'll do it when I get home. He goes, and I really didn't have a reason or like a willingness to do it. And he said, no, you should pray about it right now. I go, we're boarding. Like, I'll pray about it when I get on the plane with no intention to actually pray when I got on the plane. And so this was early on. I'm 23 years old. So I start to get on the jetway. We get off the phone, and he texts me. It's all caps. Pray about it right now! Exclamation points. And I'm like, dang. And I'm on the jetway with my bag, And I think, what am I going to say? So basically I said in my head, God, if you want me to speak, that's my number one fear. And I asked this guy, I go, why would God ever ask me to do that? And he goes, well, because it's not about you. And it's not about your ability, it's about your availability. So I guess you asked for 3 things I learned. Pray and stuff happens. Ask, listen, obey experience. That's what happened with that going to the vision. I asked and I actually listened. Sometimes people pray and they ask, and they might only listen for what they're wanting to hear instead of just actually listen. And you might miss it, the answer. Most of the time it's gonna be a yes, a no, or a not yet, or something that you can't even imagine. But if you ask and then listen, and actually do the hard thing, which is obey, go, then you experience things that maybe only God could ever orchestrate in your life. So I'm getting on the jetway, and I'll try to wrap this up quick, but I get on the jetway and I say, God, if you want me to speak, you have to slap me upside the head with it. Because I am so scared, I won't do it unless you make it so real I can't deny it. Amen. And my eyes are open and I'm carrying a bag. I sit down on the plane. This older gentleman with white hair starts talking to me. And he starts asking me about my UFC shirt. I start talking to him. And he starts pulling out my story, more of my story, from like the bullying story to like fighting and all this stuff. And I'm like, huh. And he goes, has anyone ever asked you to speak? And and I go, what? He goes, yeah. And he pulls out a yellow legal pad, puts it down, and he goes, this is how you would share this part of your story. And this is how you'd share this part of your story. And you said this, and that. I'm like, what are you doing right now? He goes, have you ever been to Dallas? I'm like, I grew up in Dallas. He goes, good. In 2 weeks, you're coming to visit your mom. And I go, what? He goes, you're going to speak in a juvenile detention center. And I'm going to pay you to speak. And I said, and I was like, what? No, I'm not. And he goes, I'm going to coach you. And I go, not in 2 weeks, man. And he said, yes, in 2 weeks you're speaking. When we land, I'm calling my assistant. She's booking your trip from Denver to there. And he wasn't going to let me get away from it. So anyways, I still tried to resist and say no. He goes, hey man, have you ever prayed about it? And I laugh and I pull out my phone. I show him, pray about it right now. He goes, what'd you say? And I said, God, you'd have to make it so real. You got to slap me upside the head with it. So he goes, boom. This like 70-year-old gentleman slaps me on the back of the head. His name, and then he starts telling me his story. His story is that his name is Jack Murph the Surf Murphy. Jack Murphy. They actually loosely based Point Break off his life. It's an older movie, Keanu Reeves surfing. This is the guy that sit right next to the plane on me. He was a world champion surfer. He played the fiddle at the Grand Ole Opry. He was a painter while in prison. I actually just got a picture sent to us last night from him, or like a lighthouse painting he painted from prison. He was supposed to never get out of prison until 2,244. I think it was 3 or 4 life sentences he was serving. So world champion surfer, guy on the water, started running drugs from like, I think Cuba to Florida, something like that. Bahamas to Florida. Anyways, this was the dude that sat right next to me, slapped me upside the head, said, you're going to speak. He coached me over 100 different times speaking. And so I guess I would say what I learned about lighthouses is the 3 things, right? Pray and stuff happens. Pray, listen, ask, listen, obey, experience. I forget what the second one is. I forgot. But the third one would be a lighthouse, not a rescue boat. And I still am in recovery. I go to these meetings all the time. And sometimes we feel like we need to be needed, or we want to be needed, and we need to put ourselves maybe even in harm's way to help somebody else. And I don't know that God's asking us to do that. Like, I've done some stuff. I've gone out there and I've been held at gunpoint and I've experienced these things. But I think really be a lighthouse, right? Stand on a firm foundation, shine bright, radiate that love, and let people be drawn to that rather than having to put yourself in maybe harm's way. I don't know if that makes sense, but it really helped me whenever it came to like addiction and recovery and things. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. If you didn't hear that, he said, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach him how to fish, feed him for a lifetime. I think there's one step beyond that, and it's how about create a fishing like marketplace, right? So that way they can feed themselves and each other for a lifetime. Yeah. One question up there. Yes, in the middle. Can you say it one more time so we can hear you? How did I let myself? Oh, I think God didn't let me get out because it was 3 weeks away. And so if I would have had longer to think about it, I probably would have never done it if I would have delayed it. How to overcome those fears. Sometimes right on the other side of fear is the absolute best, most rewarding, incredible moments that only God could give by you stepping through that fear. And I think that you can build not necessarily a muscle, right? But you can build not even a tolerance, you can build a desire to step through fear by doing it little by little. Sometimes you have to think about it being these huge, grandiose things, but really, my story didn't start going to the Congo. It started going to Bryce's hospital room and then becoming an official volunteer there 3 days a week, and then 5 days a week, and then sometimes 7 days a week. And it was just head on a swivel, looking to make a difference. And little by little, things compile. And so we have worked for 13 years. And now we're at this, like, boom, this moment of like, we're actually going to do incredible, amazing things. The last 13 years has just been the tip of the iceberg. And honestly, those things have been incredible and amazing and awesome. But it's taken 13 years to get to this point of little by little, step by step, one foot in front of the other, feet firmly on the ground while your head can be in the clouds, praying, asking for vision. And if you have the right heart, you match heart with vision, heart with vision, heart with vision. And if you can kind of have this balance and step through the fear little by little, I think eventually you start taking bigger and bigger steps. And then sometimes you just got to leap and allow, like, there's going to be a net. There's going to be a net when you take these big leaps of faith. They're there. How could you be praying for us and fight for the forgotten? Thank you. Yeah, thank you. That's a really kind question and sincere. I would say how you could be praying for us is that we're breaking ground July 30th on something that we've never done, but over the last 2 or 3 years, we've compiled some of the strongest partnerships I could ever imagine with world experts at what they do. And so, but I've been talking about it for 2 years now. And so a couple months ago, I got with our teams and our architects and our engineers, and I just said, let's put a date on the calendar and go. If we have to drain the bank account, we'll do it, which sometimes might not be the smartest thing, but it was like God saying, go, we're going to go. The current community we're in, I would say, how can you be praying for us? Be praying for our people we serve. There's about 5,000 people that live there, and a little further away more, but they're having about 3 to 5 funerals there a month. Can you imagine that? 5,000 people, smaller than Sioux Falls, right? Like, people know people, and it's a small community. It seems like every week there's a funeral, and we did a survey, and that's true. And so we want to be part of helping end that and give these children like an opportunity at, yeah. Now you could be praying for us. Amy and I are going to be getting married. And we haven't set a date yet, but we got engaged in December. We want it to be within like the next year to 18 months. So thank you. Yeah. Are there any more questions? I know this has been a little long. Thank you all.
It's been great. You did great.
How did I meet her?
That's a good question.
We met, it'll sound a little cheesy. We were in a mastermind group. It's not cheesy. It's awesome. We were in a mastermind group during COVID where people were trying to, like, I don't know, become better humans. And it was called, how can we be fit to serve the world in different areas? But we had to be fit ourselves, whether that was nutritionally or financially or relationally or in business, whatever it was, being fit. And so we went and we're in Sedona, and there was this eye gazing ceremony where all the men were standing across from all the women. There's these relationship kind of trauma therapists, and they had you step forward if you've ever experienced a certain type of trauma, which is pretty raw. And so have you been bullied? Step forward. All sorts of trauma. Be brave, be seen in it. You're in a safe place. Acknowledge that person, don't look away. Anyways, it got pretty raw. People were crying, tears and things, wiping tears. And right before they queued up the actual eye gazing part, I saw Amy to my right, and I just squared my shoulders up. She squared her shoulders up with me, and we just locked eyes. Then they said to stay in it longer. And as I did a stare down with Amy, my lips started to quiver, and a tear dropped down my cheek. And I looked away first. And so my mom said, when I told my mom this story, she goes, Justin, she's the only one from wrestling or fighting that I've ever seen beat you in a stare down. And so, like, you want to, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I would lose.
But,
I would lose for sure.
but Amy beat me, and I thought, who's that woman? And so then I went to Austin, and I was the first guest on her podcast of her new show. And after it, I said, I don't think this is professional, but I'm hungry. Are you hungry? Could I take you out? Could we consider it a date? And so we went out and asked her out at work. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Thank you all so much. Well, thank you. Can we keep those going for, like, your Trey people that are doing this, and Sandy, and just like everyone that put this together? Thank you all so much.
Well, what an honor and privilege it is to have the Lord kind of move. And like I said beforehand, I wasn't being dramatic or, trying to make it sound better than it is. But, like, seriously, God just orchestrating things all the time here at Trey, but also just, like, hearing Justin's story is just so cool. Obviously, just because it's a pretty rad story. But, like, it's also, like, I think sometimes we forget how much of a mastermind the Lord is and how much he's just significantly better at everything than we are, planning our life out, for example. And so I think a really cool thing for us, and I would speak for the whole Trey staff, and, like, first of all, thanks for saying thanks, but I think, like, it's more of an honor for us to serve you guys than anything else. I told Sandy made a joke earlier today about just, we were preparing for tonight, and and what'd you say? You said something like, it seems like we're always, like, shifting or adapting to some extent. And I said, like, if we wanted a 9 to 5, we would just go do that. Like, there's nothing that, but it's like, it's so fulfilling to carry out the walk that the Lord has for us more than anything else on the earth. And so if any of you know anything about Trey, our, like, we call it elevator pitch, is that we exist to equip and empower young adults to live out their God-given purpose. And one, we're super serious about, we will walk through life with you. But two, how cool is it to hear a story where he stepped into obedience and he lived out, and he still is living out his God-given purpose. And you watch the Lord work in his life, in the ministry that he's put before him, but also in him finding a wife, and the reconciliation with people from his past. Like, it's fantastic to watch and see. And so we love you guys. We thank you guys for being here. Stick around as always. We're open all the time, and there's always food. So come see us. I think there's still salad out there, but give another hand for Justin. How fantastic. So, thanks. Have a good night.